Monday morning, just past 9 o'clock, and while most people are at the office right now, I've decided to come out here to the lake simply because I've been missing being underwater so much. I just needed to get in the water today, and I thought to myself, why not take you guys with me and make it into a little video. So today we'll be talking about 5 tips on how to get better wide angle shots underwater. Coming up. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for tuning in again, and today we are out at the lake again, and as mentioned before, I want to use today to give you 5 tips on how you can improve your wide angle shots while shooting underwater. Now obviously there is a lot more than just those 5 tips, but I consider those 5 being the most important ones to start off with. If there's any other tips that you consider being very valuable, please feel free to put them down in the comment section, and I'll be more than happy to exchange my thoughts on that with you. Now let's get right into our very first tip, and that is to use a lens as wide as possible. Why would you want to use a lens as wide as possible? That's very simple. There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, underwater the visibility is obviously not as good as on land most of the time, so therefore you need to get closer to your object to capture it clearly. To be able to do that, you need to have a wider lens so you can come closer and still capture the entire object that you're aiming for. Also, another reason why you want to use a lens as wide as possible is because being underwater, you're actually losing some of your field of view, simply because as the light enters the water, it changes its angle and your lens will lose some width. We call this refraction, and to counteract this you want to use a lens as wide as possible with the according dome port. Now I'm using the 12 to 60mm Panasonic Leica lens on my Panasonic GH5S, and the 7-inch acrylic dome port from Nauticam on my Nauticam housing to give me as much width in my images as possible. Now obviously there is other lenses that will give you more width used with the according dome port for shooting underwater, but honestly speaking, I really enjoy using the 12 to 60mm simply because it gives me a very wide range of shooting capabilities without having to change lenses. So let's get to tip number 2, which is shoot with the sun behind you. I know that on land sometimes it is desirable to shoot against direct sunlight, so you get some flaring into your images. Underwater that is a slightly different story and is very hard to achieve, mostly because you need an immense amount of light to be able to lighten up the foreground if you're shooting directly into the sun. So to keep things simple, I would always suggest to keep the sun behind you. Use it as your big light that helps you illuminate the underwater world, and not shoot towards the sunlight. So it's always a good idea before you start shooting underwater to have a quick look around and see where the sunlight's coming from, and then position yourself accordingly so you have the sun behind you and you can use it as natural light and not something that you have to fight with your artificial light that you bring with you. And this brings us to point number 3, which is bring as much artificial light with you as possible. I've said it in many videos before, you cannot have enough artificial light with you when you go scuba diving and shooting video underwater. At the moment I'm using a set of 2 underwater video lights by the company Scuba Lamp, and each of those lights boosts 12,000 lumen of output power. It is not as much as I would like to have, definitely not, but it was the ideal compromise for me when it comes to power versus price for the video lights. Now you might think that you don't really need a lot of artificial light, or none even if you're shooting in shallow water, which can be true as long as it's sunny and nice outside. but as soon as the sun disappears, or if you actually have to shoot against the sun, because that's how your object is positioned, you will definitely need a lot of light, especially in shallow water when you have to fight the sunlight coming in from the front. Moving on to tip number 4, which is to shoot with an aperture of f.8 or higher. So you basically want to close your aperture a fair bit, so you can actually get most of your underwater scene in focus. Now this doesn't really differ too much from wide angle shooting on land, but it's still a very important concept. It's just going to make it easier for you to keep the entire scene in focus, and while that's done, you don't really have to worry about where your focus point is exactly. It's just going to make it easier for you to shoot underwater and take one task off the task loading off you. And last but not least, point number 5, which I consider to be one of the most important points, is to fine-tune your own and the buoyancy of your camera system. Now, it goes without saying that you want to be proficient with your own buoyancy before you start filming underwater and going around with a camera. But it also is going to make it a lot easier for you if your camera system is fairly neutrally buoyant and basically standing upright as you let it go, because that way you won't be fighting the camera system to stay in that position while you're shooting underwater, and you can basically just use a couple of fingers to move it through the water and position it whichever way you want. Now this is actually something that takes a little time and practice to fine-tune the buoyancy, well, of yourself obviously, but also of your underwater camera system. I encourage you to take some time and actually figure out how you can adjust the buoyancy of your underwater camera rig so that it is as close to perfectly and neutrally buoyant as possible. Having your camera system and yourself perfectly buoyant will obviously mean that you'll experience a lot less shakiness in your footage. It's just going to be a lot smoother and therefore a lot more pleasant to watch. Now there's a few tricks that you can use to smooth out your footage additionally to getting the buoyancy of your camera rig and yourself right. And that would be, for example, to shoot in higher frame rates, so shoot, for example, in 50 or 60p, and therefore when you're in post-production you can then slow the footage down to 50% or even 40% in a 24p timeline, and that's just going to smooth out a lot of these micro jitters that you might experience when shooting underwater. Also remember to turn on your in-body camera stabilization if your camera supports that and has any of it. And don't forget to turn on the lens stabilization as well. Again, if your lens supports that, it's just going to help you with those micro jitters, and it's just going to help you achieve footage as smooth as possible. Obviously, this is only in addition to getting your buoyancy right. Okay, enough talking. Now let's get ready and see if I can capture some nice wide angle shots for you guys today. Let's go. Right, that wasn't too bad, a little murkier than what I've expected, but not bad at all for a Monday morning. So I hope I was able to show you some tips and tricks for shooting wide angle underwater today. If you do want to learn more about underwater videography, please consider subscribing to the channel. There is tons of videos explaining all different aspects of filming underwater. As always, if this video was useful to you, if you found it even entertaining, please do hit that like button, you know it means a lot to me, and also consider subscribing to the channel so you're not missing out on any future content that will be uploaded here. Thanks again for watching, guys, and now I wish you a fantastic week and I'll see you in the next one.